Hello, everyone. We're here today as part of World Unity Week for A New Earth Rising, and we're going to be exploring business, technology, and consciousness, a program that originated through the Conscious Business Synergy Circle of the Evolutionary Leaders. We'll be exploring artificial intelligence and the future of consciousness. We'll show how by bridging generations can unleash wonderful transformational change through conscious business. And we'll also talk about why here and why now is our collective moment of choice to do so. We're also going to be discussing why the relationship of business and technology and consciousness is so fundamental to both a new earth arising and our conscious evolution. And that's because business and technology have been based in worldviews. They're actually the same. Even though our technologies are at the very forefront of 21st century scientific exploration, they are still based on a much earlier worldview of the nature of reality. And our business organizations are not just those, the way we educate our kids, our healthcare, or the way we structure ourselves in societies, at least most of those, are actually based on a 19th century science, a 19th century worldview, which even with all its incredible discoveries and abilities, technology has also been grounded in. And this 19th century worldview is based on a 19th century science, a science of a universe that is essentially mechanistic, solely material in form and made up of separate objects. It's essentially a non-living, a dead universe, bereft of meaning and of innate purpose. And in the 150 years or more since that worldview gained a huge amount of traction, so much that it really transformed our worldviews and the way we relate with each other and our planetary home, its perceptions are now being turned on their head. And instead, we're discovering at all scales of existence and many, many fields of research that our universe instead meaningfully exists, purposefully evolves from simplicity to complexity over an amazing evolutionary arc of the past 14 billion years to here and now. But in that journey of simplicity to complexity is an essentially living, sentient, conscious universe that exists and evolves as a unified entity. So reality is real, but our notions of separation are illusory. And what we're finding now is we're waking up and the evidence is supporting us. It's converging with universal wisdom teachings to bring at the very heart of our understanding of ourselves and the nature of reality, consciousness, where mind and consciousness universal and expressed at every scale of existence, including us, as fractals, as microcosms of our universe's entirety and intelligence, is showing us that we have meaning and purpose because our minds and our consciousness and that of the whole world isn't what we have. It's what we are fundamentally, what we and the whole world fundamentally are. So when we talk about business and technology and consciousness, we're now bringing consciousness and the understanding of an emergent conscious cosmology. The story of our universe and the story of us is being revealed and reimagined into this wonderful new and unitive narrative. So with all its abilities, the worldview that underpins technology can move through this evolutionary arc with us. And of course, business with its incredible importance in our world, can also take its place now.
I am thrilled to be here to talk to you, Stephanie, about AI, consciousness, and the new requirements in the big leagues. And you have such a unique perspective, having been a tech leader for a long time, Fortune 100, anything from startups to all these exciting companies. And with your perspective, what is alive right now in this, should we call it pretty turbulent times and exciting times in business?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. It is wonderful to be here talking about this really important topic. And I'm so happy that we're talking about bringing together big thinking in technology and the thinking that is about mindfulness and consciousness. It's just really exciting and needed. What is really alive, and I love that term, alive, right now in the energy of business is fear. Leaders are fearful of new technology, that the technology has now gotten ahead of us, particularly when we talk about AI and it's all over the news. So I think leaders are a little fearful, and they need skills so that they don't just shut down and ignore the technology, which would be horrible. But they don't have the proper skills, and they need more skills to bring it forward and to make it useful and safe in the corporate environments.
And we can see that. I think everyone can see that there has been an escalation due to generative AI. You've been in the tech field for so long. Would you say, through all the technological advances that you've been through, that this time it's different?
It's different, but in a way it's the same for people. We've had so many technological advances. At least in my career, I hate to say this because it makes me seem like I've been around way longer than I have. But, there's been really dangerous technology in the past, like weapons, nuclear weapons. Even the invention of the internet in itself has caused huge disruption for people. But those were technological advances that got used for lots of functional things in businesses, helped businesses grow, helped people operate. It actually helped us enormously during COVID, where people needed things like the internet to continue working and going to school. But what's different about generative AI is that in these models that are being used on human language, and remember, human language is what we as humans use to communicate. And now we're teaching machines our language. And what's interesting there, why it's different, is that as these models get more and more what we call trained, they listen to more data and they start to recognize patterns. The scale at which they can do that is much bigger than the scale of what I believe at the moment, maybe not in the future, our human capability is. So just imagine that every time you learn something, Linda, you acquire a new skill. Every person on the planet now has that skill. And every time I acquire a new skill or a new piece of knowledge or a new thought, every person on the planet acquires at the same time. This is how these generative models work, because each one of their nodes learns at the same time. So what's different really is scale. And because of changes in compute speed and capacity and a reduction in energy usage and some of these, the technology around computers, it is that evolution that has actually fueled this, this new type of technology called artificial intelligence or general intelligence.
Yeah, and the speed of which things are changing, I think, is catching most people by surprise. And you brought up COVID before. I almost see now, with the benefit of hindsight, that COVID was a good training ground, or like a yeah, it was like we were practicing as leaders to come up with unprecedented policies, things we had no idea what was really going on, etc. So in a way, what we learned through the COVID pandemic is actually something that we can use now due to the speed of it, because leaders are not doing that well. And as a mind trainer in the corporate sphere, I see that what's new now for leaders is not only the speed of which this is coming at them, because that means that there are the speed of wonderful possibilities and the speed of threats, and of course, what is our competition doing? So you have this technological know-how that you need to have as a leader, and at the same time you have this whole breadth of other things you need to pay attention to, the DEI work that's been so important lately, and the ESG, the human aspect of leadership is on the agenda now in a way that it's never been before. So I have worked with you now for many years, and I've been coming into your teams, whether they've been in smaller companies, mid-size, or in the Fortune 100 world, where you've been a tech leader for quite some time. And I've been so privy to merging your view of business. You believe in conscious leadership, but you know exactly what's required in what we call the big leagues. And we're actually very excited about the fact that we've written a book together called Mind Skills, and that is about how to unleash your potential to lead in the big leagues. But as we're talking about big leadership right now, we have outlined a few things in the book because there's a shift that's necessary, right? And before we get into the shifts, how would you sort of measure how prepared leaders are right now? And what's the difference between those who are prepared to make a mind shift and make things work different, and that they would have to self-reflect, become self-aware, and do things differently? What would you say?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of leaders out there who understand that they need to be conscious, they need to be aware, they need to be aware of what's going on in their teams. What I think is missing are real skills to implement those things in business, to start making transformational change in organizational behavior, in policy behavior, in HR, in team dynamics. And a lot of that for leaders means, what you think you're really smart about is no longer the most important thing. You could be really, really a smart, brilliant person when it comes to let's use the example of AI models, computer programming, or big data. But if you can't communicate and help your team members and your leaders and other leaders around you, your peers, feel comfortable with what you're working on, it doesn't go anywhere. So those skills of being personal, understanding how to communicate in an authentic way, listening to other people, these seem like simple things, but unless you're really focused and calm, one of the things I will say before we get off this topic of what's going on in the world, I think the fear factor, and you said escalation, like everybody's escalating these threats. I hear all kinds of terms being used. We need calm, focused decision making, and that takes a different type of person. It has nothing to do with how much knowledge you have.
And there seems to be, we're forgetting that humans will evolve from what we are today. We seem to think in the way that we show up in the business world that this is end all be all, this is how far we're going to get in evolution. So, in evolution, and we forget that there's a trajectory that we don't know exactly what it is yet. Maybe someday we'll be privy to this information. What is it that actually determines the trajectory and the pulling, if you will. It feels like evolution wants something from us, So there seems to be a big water divider now between those leaders who are prepared to be part of this huge evolution that's happening right now, fueled by technology, but technology is also fueled by our consciousness development. And so this is a cycle, it's sort of like a spiral that moves forward. So it's going to be really interesting, and we both know from the roundtables that we've had around leadership in New York City with high up there, different C-suite and leaders from various companies coming together, talking about what is needed right now, what do we long for in leadership right now, and it's so obvious that everybody, and the funny thing is that we invite people to these leadership roundtables not knowing exactly what their thoughts are. And surprisingly, everybody, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, we need the human in leadership. Isn't that fascinating?
Yes, and you're exactly right. Those conversations were really, really poignant to me, because being a leader, sometimes you just have to get things done, and you lose sight of what's happening, not one level below you, but 2 levels below you. There's all these things about skip interviews and skip levels and all of this, and those are all perfectly fine. But leaders now need to be in the mind share of deeper parts of their organization. So 2 things are happening. They have to learn how to communicate and go lower, but also there's been a flattening, if you will. And if you follow what's going on in the big tech the last few months, a lot of people are getting laid off, but they're not the senior people, and they're not the people doing the work. They're kind of in the middle doing tasks that are now either seen as can be done by AI or not, or in the way of communication chains. So, I joke about this a lot. Sometimes, you talk about people, there's so many people involved, but all they're doing is playing telephone with an idea. That's bad in a big organization, right?
It's a good
So
way.
I think that leaders are getting deep within themselves and saying, okay, I realize I have to communicate properly, and I have to get these people excited and get them, energetic about what we're trying to achieve. But I have this thing in the middle that's in the way. So leaders have to get better at doing it, and organizations have to get better at understanding how to open those pathways, because traditional kind of known ways of communicating just don't work.
Yeah, and from the consciousness community that I also visit and belong to, I'm always in the middle between the consciousness community and the business community, and we often talk about the problem of language, that whatever we use as language is just like, whoa, way above, or I don't know, just doesn't hit right for business leaders. And I love what you just said, that leaders need to be aware of the fact that they are part of the mind share of the organization. I think that word mind share will be something that we can all put in our pockets as we continue this work. A lot of work to do, and the business community has a lot of work to do, and hopefully we can do it together. With that, I want to say a big thank you to you, Stephanie.
It's my pleasure. It's wonderful speaking with you. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Tamara Moore. I'm calling in from Colorado, and I'm really excited today to begin a conversation across the generations as we think about this concept of new Earth rising and working together, and how do we co-create and collaborate versus complain about each other and have that conflict between the generations. I spent 2 years working in higher education at university, working with students, working with young professionals. And one day I was sitting at my desk and I started to Google, there must be a more conscious way to do this, because I could see the tension mounting between the different groups. And then we went on to create together with those groups these amazing wellness initiatives that won us award for human sustainability. And working in that conscious business space now in energy with businesses, we're starting to dig into this deeper. So I am proud to introduce our first person for the conversation, which is Lori. And Lori, you work in that innovation, startup, entrepreneurial space. Introduce yourself and tell us what you're learning.
Hi, I'm Lori, and I'm calling in from Amsterdam today. Over the past 9 years, I think I've worked with over 100 impact-driven technology companies. Some are startups, some are a little bit bigger than that. And I think what I love most about it is that every leader and every entrepreneur and that we work with, first of all, the energy that is created and the creativity that is unleashed when starting a business, when trying to do something or develop a product that has never been done before is incredible. And then secondly, also the drive and determination that, the leaders that we work with have in trying to disrupt the industries that they're part of, whether that's in sustainable energy, whether that's in creating circular products or improving our healthcare system. It's something that still touches me every day. Then answering your questions, what have I learned in the past 9 years in working with teams and leaders like this? I think first and foremost that the fact that you're starting a conscious business or business that doesn't just try to keep with business as usual or replicate old ways of doing things, is the fact that it's a sustainable company doesn't mean that the leadership doesn't repeat the same mistakes of the past. So whether that's really being driven by ego, being driven by greed, or even if you're trying to build a company that is very mindful of your people, of the planet, the profit side can still take a hold of you. So of course we also see that sometimes. Something else that we see, and this is also where like my Jungian, I love Carl Jung and his work, interest is piqued, is that sometimes we also walk into companies and they're like, we want to do things in a radically different way. The old way is something that is purely ego driven. So we reject all notions of ego because that's bad and that's not how you build a business. Whereas we're like, hey, and also from a Jungian perspective, if you reject anything, whether that's a part of you or something so fundamental to human beings as, having an ego, which also allows us to function in society, it starts controlling you. So it creates all sorts of weird things where now, where then personalities within companies are also rejected because they are seen as, they have too big of an ego, even though they could have bring tremendous value and creativity to the company. So that's something else. But I think what has touched me most is when we've worked with clients or we've worked with teams. And we always work on, okay, if you want to scale your business, if you want to scale your company, the critical thing is to be really truthful to yourself, to have and really encourage, not just in yourself, but also in those around you, the ability to reflect on your own behavior, on your own patterns, on the culture that you're creating as leaders, to make sure that whatever vision you have and whatever values that you have and say that you want to build your company around, that you really stay true to that rather than maybe saying one thing and then doing another. And yeah, of course, I'm very fortunate to say that many of the leaders that we work with also put that into action and that have this constant reflection, critical inquiry, and open conversations with, their fellow leaders, but also with their employees around, hey, did we take the right decision there? What are some of the dilemmas that we are faced with as a company because we want to do things a little bit differently than maybe the old status quo? But of course, that's just me in my own little entrepreneurial bubble. Tamara, I know that you've worked with larger organizations, corporations, or institutions like universities. I'm very curious to hear maybe your perspective on lessons learned in trying to bring maybe different organizations or entities, young, innovative enterprises, technology leaders, universities, and corporations together to make sure that whatever effort is put into changing systems doesn't stay an isolated effort, but happens through co-creation and collaboration.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. And I was thinking as you were talking about ego, I think the New Earth Rising is about learning to align your soul or your authenticity with your role. And when that ego steps up and you're not feeling in your power and your authenticity, you tend to go on offense or defense, which creates offense and defense. So the collaboration piece is showing up in alignment. So I love that. I could talk all day about that. But anyway, Mariama, you intersected with the Conscious Business Institute when we were really trying to bring language and visuals to this new Earth Rising and our role in creating consciously. Could you talk about that? And then also this paradox you introduced to us that there's this need and this yearning for the timeless wisdom that we've oftentimes just forgotten about.
Yeah. Those are some good times. Yeah, people find me when they want to co-create something new. So I call myself like a translator of vision, an advocate for impact, and mostly a catalyst for real sustainable change. And what I see in my work when people want to do something new, either create it or implement it, there's two approaches, very generalized, but I'm going to give it to you very straight. So one is trust-based, knowing, like an unwavering trust and feeling that in the new and the unknown lies a huge opportunity for improvement and progress. And then the fear-based one is actually, I'm afraid of the unknown. It's very uncertain. I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to go. So I'll just stay here, stagnant energy. So that means that you're moving actually nowhere, maybe backwards. Definitely no progress. And then you can say, you know what, all of these change management approaches say, well, you know, it's all about the why. Convince them why it is important. And I say, that's important too, but it's more so about remembrance. So where do we come from actually? And that's kind of buried, or it's dormant. It's this dormant collective wisdom that we all have. And I say that it is ingrained in our DNA. It's part of who we are. If you look at Maslow's basic human needs pyramid, it's in there. And what it is this sense of belonging, and it's longing to be part of something, a community, together with others. And what we've seen is that for the past, 2-3 generations, it's all about me, I, myself. There's not really an us. And if we look at these native tribes, so I'm half African, which is a huge continent, but it's filled with these different and various tribes, and they all organize themselves and work together as a community. And so it's really all about us and our environment. And they understand that actually there's this huge complex web that is interdependent, and they're part of an ecosystem. So if I do something, it will affect you, vice versa, and the room around us or the environment around us. And when you have that notion in you, you behave differently, because it's not just about me anymore. It's about every one of us, right? And this is that dormant wisdom that lies within all of us. And if we wake up to that, change or going in or stepping into the new actually doesn't become something that we should be fearful of or that's uncertain. It's really like a journey back into who we are and going back to source in a way. So that makes it really beautiful and also light. And I think if we would approach the unknown and the new world in that way, we can build beautiful things together. That's the prerequisite.
I love that. So as we're thinking about creating this new Earth Rising together, I'm curious for both of you, how does the older generations help support your unique voice and viewpoint?
So for me, it's all about dialogue. So I think Lori also touched on that about inquiry and co-creation. So of course, it all starts within us, but it also is a dialogue and a conversation that we together should have and really talk about the legacy, the world that we live in. How do we want to shape it right now? And how do we want to shape it for future generations to come? Because we all have a stake in that and we all can impact that in a way which is either, a little bit stagnant or really progressive. And I think there we can build things together. But it starts with a conversation. What about you, Lori?
Well, I think first of all, throughout my career, I've always had many positive, inspiring role models. So women in positions of power that in some way or form really inspired me. I mean, if I look at my family, like my grandmothers never did anything beyond, primary education or primary school. My mom was the first in her family to go to college. And for us, those are things that have become super normal. So that in and of itself, I think is good to recognize and to realize. Then if I look at the generations that precede us, I think maybe my ask would be a little bit more practical, like help us navigate the spaces or environments or rooms that we don't feel comfortable in, and that we might would benefit from having support in navigating that. And also being able to have truly honest conversations. I mean, I spoke about ego. I spoke about the importance of, critical inquiry and looking at oneself and one's behaviors and patterns to make sure we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. And this is a two-way street, but then just being able to have open conversations and being challenged when we say one thing and do another would be the other thing that I would love.
Wow. Well, as you were talking about mentoring and role modeling, I think that's two-way. So we think of it as top down, but let's role model and mentor each other. I had a young professional really challenge me and say, when are you going to spend your social capital and that authority that you have to move things along and to progress? And then you're both inspiring me to think about what bold question could we rally around together and explore. So I was just thinking, if our success was guaranteed, what bold steps would we create together to create this new Earth Rising? And that's inspiring me. So that's the challenge, I think, as we move forward, keep these conversations going and make space for them. Any other parting words?
No, I like to challenge the audience to join the conversation and maybe also think of who they could mentor and who they could ask for them to be their mentor as well.
Thank you both.
Lee, it's so lovely to be exploring this topic with business and technology and consciousness with you. And our sort of exploration really focuses on why here and why now. So I'd love to ask you as a young leader, as a young conscious leader, as a young entrepreneur, with this emergent understanding, this new and unitive understanding and narrative of a living, evolving, unified, conscious universe of innate meaning and purpose and evolutionary purpose. What do you feel is the most important message of this understanding, literally for here and now?
Well, I think it's exactly what you just said. You used a word that in your introduction that really resonated with me, and it was belong. And I think as we talk about evolution and we think about our next step and where we have to go from here, we are sort of returning to something that we all maybe already understand, or quite possibly do understand already, that we already belong together. We belong here. We belong on this path with that brings all of these pieces together. And I think that is so crucial, because otherwise we're fighting against evolution, and we're not going to win. But then we begin to feel frustrated and hopeless and sad. And I think, like, when we feel disconnected from each other and it feels like things aren't working, we've come away from this innate understanding and wisdom that we belong in. And so coming back to our real understanding of each other and how we belong together, I think, is just so important, because, like you were saying, here and now, we don't really have another choice. And I think that's the most important part, is that there is a path forward, and we are well on our way there.
I love that. And, as a cosmologist, when I'm asked what does a cosmologist do, or what's it mean, for me, it's about being curious about the nature of reality. So my whole life has been sort of an exploration of a world and worlds, that are way beyond what we might perceive as our universe. And so I've always experienced the world, perhaps as spiritual seekers of thousands of years have, as a completely interconnected, wondrous expression of divine creation, of which we are both creation and co-creators. But also, what I love about this emergent understanding, which is scientifically based, and I'm a scientist, of course, as holding many other hats, is that it's evidence based. It's not just a hope in a way; it's authentic hope, because it's grounding us in the reality that unity isn't an aspiration, it's our existential reality. And of course, the other aspect, which I'd love you to speak of your experience too, is that it converges with universal wisdom teachings, which I've loved, honored and respected and studied since childhood as well. So we're in this incredible emergent moment where it's almost as though the entirety of our human journey of exploration is coming to this homecoming, to remember who we really are, to then sort of, invite us into this next step of our adventure of conscious evolution. So I'd love to hear some of your journey and why you're feeling this is such an incredible moment, both of choice, but of opportunity.
Yeah, so I've been so fortunate to have a foundation of some of this ancient wisdom, this just from really being able to travel all over the world. My parents exposed me to so much growing up, and then I went up and I lived in this world, and I embarked on a rather corporate lifestyle, and so I think it's been very much my personal journey, building these two parts of my foundation and creating something that is relevant and resonant to me. That's certainly been a personal journey. But I think, as you mentioned, it does speak to sort of like the different factions of people that we have in our lives, the different factions of people in the world, some of which feel very strongly connected to this ancient wisdom, to these to the wisdom that really we all have inside of us. Many of us just are more sensitive to it, or have been exposed to it. So many people just haven't been exposed to some of these teachings, and so it doesn't resonate immediately with them. But then we also have our scientists, and we have our mathematicians, and we have these very analytical, logical thinkers. And I think, as you were just talking, what is so special about this moment is that those two types or ways of thinking or ways of being are coming together, and they're proving each other right. All these conversations where, well, I believe in this, but you can't prove it. Now we can prove it. And then we have all of this scientific proof and thought and theory that's backed by thousands of years of people looking up at the stars and discovering in ways that we don't even yet understand. And so I think it certainly, it lends validity to my, my personal journey of bringing all of this together. But I think it has and will continue to allow us broadly to come together, the different types of people in the world, and all of our different beliefs to really come together. And like you said, have this
I love that. And Jess, what you're saying as well is that, one of the things that's been able to come out of this emergent cosmology is a narrative, because we tell stories. We're story sharing species, and we've told, stories based on our underlying narratives since the get-go, I guess. And what we've been able to do as part of this emergence is to come together to articulate a unitive narrative that can underpin and frame us as we move forward. And what you were saying, I think I loved what you were saying about the many voices. I'm hoping to write my third book of my trilogy called Many Voices, One Heart. And it's the story of us and I hope our potential now. But, the unitive narrative speaks to both our inner and outer, our being and our doing. And again, a complete dance and convergence of those two aspects of the wholeness of who we are. It also speaks to the sacred marriage that I sometimes call it, and certainly the ancients did, of the divine feminine and divine masculine within us. And the ancient traditions, I'm sure you're aware, speak to when we balance those attributes within us, and of course they're within all of us, then a divine child, that third beautiful, creative, emergent aspect of our wholeness comes forward. And you mentioned earlier the arts, but we're creative beings. And so as this all comes forward and is not just understood, but experienced and embodied, it seems to me that not only will we enable the complementarity of feminine and masculine attributes to sort of, throughout our lives, but more and more in business, more and more in technology, and obviously through conscious business, but it brings that creativity and that emergence of that third aspect of our wholeness, the divine child, that playfulness, that joyfulness, that naughtiness, that all the to be embodied. I'd love you to speak to that, if you might.
Sure. I think there's so much. Every time you speak, I'm like, that's what a perfect way to put that, so we could go forever. But I think that sort of like gendered energy that you talked about, that is so important. It has really come up, I think, in public conversation recently. And I think there is a sort of when our minds are being expanded, especially in a short period of time, there can be a little bit of tension amongst us. And I think people have very rigid understandings of gender. It sort of underpins some like foundational understandings that we have about ourselves and about each other. And I think as we begin to expand what it means to hold masculine and feminine energy within ourselves, it will be difficult. I think a lot of this, when you talk about it, it sounds easy, but we both know that, when you're out in the real world and Dr. Jude isn't on your shoulder anymore, there is tension and learning that has to be done. But I think that is just so powerful, being able to come outside of ourselves a little bit, to understand that our foundation, what keeps us safe and secure, is not that we hold one masculine or feminine energy. It's not our rigid understandings of it. Our foundations are much broader, are much more cosmic than that. And so we can let go of some of our traditional thoughts about this and really be able to take these two things together. And you also mentioned technology, and I think that's so important, because sometimes we consider technology, especially as AI is coming out, it sort of seems like it is separate from us, right? Like we are humans, and then technology sits over here, and then there are robots and all sorts of things that are happening over there. But we are creating them, and it is a type of creativity. It speaks to how expansive we can be, that we've created something like AI, and because we're creating it, it reflects us. And that's why I think it's so important that the people at the forefront of these industries, the people that are coding, the people that are writing code for these AI programs, that they look like the communities that we're in, So if you have, the same sort of very rigid person creating all this technology, that is what is going to be reflected. And as tech gets smarter and smarter than us, it still can only grow and exponentially evolve in what it knows. And so I think it really is important that as we bring like our understandings of gender and power and energy and playfulness and naughtiness, that we really begin to reflect it into our creative pursuits, whether it's technology or the arts or business.
I love that. And there's I know that we're going to continue in our session to have that conversation on AI. I'd love a different word, because in this emergent cosmology, nothing is artificial. So maybe we can find another word that expresses and more honors this creativity, because it seems to me that, what we might be, if we can wake up to remember we're inseparable, and this conscious evolution that is inviting us, it's an invitation of our whole universe, I feel, and our planetary home for us. Maybe we can enter into a co-evolutionary partnership, whereas what we've hitherto understood to be AI, whose superpower is data collection and putting it together. And our superpower is that we are grounded in the source of all being, that we are grounded in that holistic understanding of who we are. We're remembering this, and that we have intuition as our superpower. So maybe we can sort of bring superpowers together and have a whole new Marvel universe that takes us all forward. The other thing I'd love to sort of ask you, but before, my background also for 25 years was in corporate life, and I became, the group finance director of 2 $500 million turnover businesses that operate in 36 countries. So I know the challenges. And but I also know the potential when we can start to wake up to this new realization and much more co-creative, co-evolutionary progress together in all that we do. So this is the science of love. I was at a wonderful gathering last night with an amazing organization called Reboot the Future. And their mission is the golden rule. Treat others and our planetary home as we would wish to be treated. And many different versions of that. But they're all saying the same thing about relationship and right relationship. And so I'd just like to end our time together. I don't want to end our time together, but we have to end our time together. Your journey and your wisdom is profound. And I really appreciate that. And we all have wisdom within us, but often our journeys don't encourage it to come forward. So I would like to ask you, what would you say to other young business entrepreneurs, leaders who perhaps haven't had this incredible journey that you've had of life experience? What would you say to them? How would you invite them into this adventure together?
It is, thank you for saying that. It is always such a great time to hang with you and chat. And it is a great way to come out of sort of the focused corporate, Monday through Friday life that I'm living right now. And I think that if I were, as I invite the people around me, my friends and my coworkers, to have these conversations, I can only speak to what I'm doing right now and what I have found myself doing over the last few months and years as the world has started to look more and more scary, is actually to lean on the understandings that we have as business professionals, for example, in being able to look at a structure that's not working and reimagine it. And I think leaning on that imagination piece is so crucial. And for me, I find it to be very frightening. I like structure, and even if the existing structure maybe isn't working out too well, imagining, burning it all down and starting over is very, very terrifying for me. But it does, it does offer, I think, a different way of thinking, using, the skills and the thought processes that we have to create something that is more equitable, to create something that is rooted in, like you were talking, like the capital L, love, that is our foundation. I think using the skills that we already have to reimagine a different future, and what I encourage myself to do, and what I encourage people when having these conversations, is that there isn't a right answer, and you don't have to come to an answer either. I think the most crucial part, especially for people that sort of have their heads down, focused on a certain way of life, is just to lift up and imagine that there is a different life to live. There is a different way of living. This path to evolutionary growth, like we spoke about at the very beginning, it exists and we're on it. So what can the world look like? What will the world look like? And then I think, because we have all the skills to build it already, so it is really just that piece of lifting our heads up and imagining something different that I think is so crucial, and something that I am excited to continue to do. And really, it is such a privilege to be able to talk to you about it, because I feel every time we have one of these conversations, I feel 4 steps ahead already. So it's a real privilege and an honor. And I would love to hear your thoughts. If I could ask you one question at the very end, is what advice would you give to me and to people like me who are sort of at the beginning of their path of growth, and imagining how they can really be a part of this community and move it forward?
Thank you. I two things that have stood me in my journey. One is, and it does sound easy, it's not, but it is simple. Keep showing up and get out of the way. Keep showing up and get out of the way. And what that means, in a way, is that the question that you always ask, and I know you're already asking it, but it's a question I always ask myself, is what would love do? What would love do? And follow that guidance. And also appreciating that, we do have incredible superpowers when we're able to open ourselves to them, and the intuition is top of the list. So I love what you're doing. I'm so appreciative of it. And the other thing is, you are what I would call a soul model. You're not a role model, you're a soul model. So inviting all of the incredibly diverse soul models to shine your light, to shine their light, to share with each other. We can go forward together as we link up and lift up through this incredible time of here and now. So thank you, Lee.
Yep, that's right. Thank you.